Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're tackling a chapter called Inhabiting the Kingdom. It's from Anti Joronich's book, LGT.
Oh, this is a good one.
I got to ask you shared this excerpt with me because you're super interested in how Adventists view lifestyle choices,
Yeah.
especially with that whole Christ's return is coming thing looming overhead.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating topic, how that belief plays out in everyday life. And Juronich really doesn't hold back, gets right to the heart of it.
Well, buckle up, listeners. This deep dive feels like we're about to hold up a mirror to our souls here. So, where do we even begin?
Well, Juronich jumps right in. He calls out what he calls lifestyle malfunctions, basically saying, hey, Adventist community, we've got some blind spots, time to face them.
Okay, stop right there. Malfunctions. I'm listening. What kind of malfunctions are we talking about?
The first one is inconsistency. That classic do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. Like, he gives this example of someone who drops a ton of money on a luxury car.
Oh, I know the type.
Right, but then judges someone else for enjoying, like, a fancy cup of coffee or something.
Oh, yeah, that disconnect
Yeah.
between what we preach and how we actually live, huh?
Exactly.
Ouch. Yeah, I think we've all seen that in action. Is he saying this is like a uniquely Adventist problem, though? Or are we just human?
I mean, he acknowledges that hypocrisy is, a universal human struggle, but he's especially concerned with how it plays out in the Adventist community, given our emphasis on preparing for Christ's return through a distinct lifestyle.
Yeah, makes sense. So is that kind of inconsistency like undermining our credibility?
She seems to suggest that, yeah, that it weakens our witness.
Right, right. Okay, so what's another one of these malfunctions?
He talks about segmentation, this tendency to hyper-focus on certain aspects of faith, but then totally neglecting others.
Ooh, pick and choose, huh?
Yeah, like you can't just cherry pick parts of the Bible you want to follow. It's like pouring all your energy into missions, but then ignoring issues of social justice right here at home.
He specifically calls out emphasizing evangelism and missions, but not putting equal weight on social justice. Does he actually offer any solutions, though, to break free from this kind of compartmentalized faith?
He does. Juronich challenges readers to look inward and ask some hard questions, like why are we drawn to certain aspects of faith, but then others feel like a chore? What makes us uncomfortable? It's about honestly facing our own biases and motivations.
I like that. So it's not just about pointing fingers outward.
No, it's about looking inward. He even uses the example of Adventist pioneers. Like Joseph Bates, he was deeply involved in social justice work, even while believing Christ's return was imminent. Actually, there's this powerful quote where Bates calls America this land of blood and slavery, a heaven-daring, soul-destroying, slave-holding, neighbor-murdering country.
Whoa. Bates definitely didn't mince words, so he truly embodied that integration of faith and action, even in areas that might have been controversial for the time.
Absolutely.
He was a powerful voice.
All right, so what other malfunctions does Juronich call out? He talks about misapplication, which is basically mistaking outward signs of piety for genuine spirituality. He brings up Jonathan Edwards' concept of the signs of nothing.
Oh, yeah. Edwards was all about discerning true conversion from just superficial displays of religion, right?
Exactly.
I feel like this is so relevant, not just to Adventists, but to anyone trying to live a meaningful life.
Yeah, absolutely. Juronich argues that things like long prayers, strict rules, or even like passionate worship.
The things people usually associate with being religious.
Right, yeah, exactly. They can be misleading. I mean, they could be indicators of a deep relationship with God, but they could also be masking deeper issues.
It's like we're going through the motions without truly letting our faith transform us from the inside out.
That's exactly it.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How can we tell if our actions are genuinely motivated by faith or if we're just performing?
Well, he emphasizes cultivating what Paul calls the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control.
Right, those inner qualities.
He argues that those are the true markers of a transformed life, not just outward displays of piety.
That makes a lot of sense. It's definitely easier said than done.
It is, and that's where the final malfunction comes in: delusion. He uses the story of David and Bathsheba
Oh, wow.
to illustrate how we can use religion to mask our own sin, and avoid taking responsibility for our actions.
That's powerful. It's so easy to judge others, but turning that critical lens inward and honestly judging ourselves, that's a whole different ballgame.
It is, and he doesn't offer an easy answer, but I think he's advocating for constant self-reflection, a willingness to be vulnerable before God, and a commitment to aligning our actions with our beliefs. Being honest with ourselves and with God about where we fall short.
So to recap, these lifestyle malfunctions are like these warning signs, right? They're pointing to areas where our faith might be out of sync with our actions. And it sounds like Sharonich is calling for a more integrated, a more authentic way of living out our faith.
Absolutely, he is.
But how does this connect to the idea of apocalyptic identity? That's kind of central to this chapter, right?
That's where it gets really interesting. He argues that how we perceive the world, how we see things, is deeply shaped by both our beliefs and our deeper selves. He even quotes C.S. Lewis, who said, "What you see and hear depends a great deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are."
So our worldview, our experiences, our very character, they're all filters, right? They shape
Wow.
how we interpret and respond to everything around us.
Exactly. And then he dives into this idea of orienting beliefs, which includes everything from like our fundamental worldview to even seemingly minor convictions.
He uses that example about Black Friday versus black holes, and that really stuck with me. It's like he's saying that all beliefs are equally important, not just the big theological ones.
It's a good point. I don't think he's necessarily saying all beliefs carry the same weight in like some ultimate sense, but he is highlighting how even seemingly small convictions can have this disproportionate influence on how we navigate the world and make decisions.
Right, like those subconscious biases we all have that we don't even realize are affecting us.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the cognitive unconscious. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a concept we don't talk about enough, especially in faith circles.
hmm
How does that fit in all of this?
Well, he argues that sometimes our deeply held beliefs, even those we might not be consciously aware of, can override our stated beliefs. And he quotes A.W. Tozer, who said that our true understanding of God might be buried under the rubbish of conventional religious notions.
Okay, that's a powerful image. So it's not just about examining our beliefs, but also digging deeper, right? Unearthing those hidden assumptions and biases that might be shaping our actions without us even realizing it.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of self-reflection.
It is. But he doesn't stop there. Dronich goes on to argue that our existential situation, our desires, passions, embodied sensibilities, character, and personal experiences, all of that also contributes to who we are and what we perceive.
He says people often reject Christianity for aesthetic reasons rather than intellectual ones. What does that even mean? Can you unpack that using an example from the book?
So he's suggesting that people often reject faith not because they find it logically flawed, but because they find it aesthetically unappealing, even repulsive. Like he uses the example of the fall, noting that Adam and Eve's rejection of God wasn't really a result of a reasoned argument.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like this sudden shift in their aesthetic sensibilities. They saw the forbidden fruit and were captivated by its beauty, its allure. Their senses led them astray, even though they knew it was wrong.
So he's saying that our gut reactions, our feelings can sometimes override our intellect and lead us away from God. That's pretty profound.
It is. And it has implications for how we approach, like, evangelism, even how we understand our own spiritual journeys. I mean, if we're honest, haven't there been times when we've been drawn to or repulsed by things not because of logic, but because of a deeper, almost unexplainable feeling? It's like something just clicks or clashes with certain ideas or experiences.
Absolutely. But if our existential situation
Yeah.
plays such a big role in how we see the world, does that mean we're just slaves to our emotions? Are we doomed to be tossed around by our feelings?
And not at all. He really emphasizes the importance of character development, cultivating virtues like honesty, compassion, self-control. Those are essential for perceiving the world rightly and living a life that's aligned with God's will.
He connects this back to the pursuit of truth, too, right? Mentions that 2 Peter 1.5 to 8 talks about adding to our faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and so on. It's like these virtues are essential tools for understanding and living out the truth.
Exactly. He sees this as a call for an integrated approach to faith, one where our beliefs, actions, and inner selves are all working in harmony. And this, he argues, is at the heart of authentic apocalyptic identity.
So wait, are you telling me that apocalyptic living isn't just about stocking up on canned goods and waiting for the world to end? Because that's kind of the image that pops into my head when I hear that phrase.
That seems to be his point. He critiques what he sees as a neutering of Adventism, where the urgency and radical commitment of the pioneers have kind of faded. He even mentions George Knight's work, Apocalyptic Vision and the Neutering of Adventism, which argues that Losing this apocalyptic focus leads to a watered-down faith.
So it sounds like he's pushing back against this idea that apocalypticism is all about doom and gloom and detachment from the world.
Yes.
It's about something much deeper and more transformative.
Exactly. He acknowledges that there are valid criticisms of apocalypticism, especially when it becomes associated with fear-mongering or like an unhealthy obsession with end-time scenarios.
Right.
But he argues that the Adventist understanding of apocalyptic identity is something different altogether.
Okay, so what does authentic Adventist apocalyptic identity look like, according to Geronicic? What sets it apart?
Well, he outlines 10 key centrations, or ways of understanding the world. They kind of shape this unique way of life.
10. Okay, we might need a whole other deep dive just to unpack those.
Yeah, they paint a pretty vivid picture of what he's getting at.
All right, I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, so let's dive into those 10 centrations that Geronich lays out. They're really the heart of his vision for what a genuine, authentic apocalyptic identity looks like.
All right, hit me with number one. What's the foundation for this whole apocalyptic identity thing?
He starts with God's benevolence. He's really adamant that this has to be the starting point, the bedrock of everything. He even quotes 1 John 4:8, "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love."
So we're talking about a God of love, not a God of wrath and judgment. But doesn't that kind of clash with the whole concept of the apocalypse, with all the judgment and destruction that's supposed to happen? How do you reconcile those two ideas?
That's a common misunderstanding of apocalyptic thinking, I think. Geronich argues that the coming of God, whether in creation, redemption, or final glorification, is ultimately an expression of God's love and faithfulness. And he sees the self-emptying, or kenosis, of Christ as a model for how we should live. It's not about escaping a vengeful God, but about aligning ourselves with a God of self-giving love.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about reflecting God's character in our own lives. So what's the next centration? What else shapes this apocalyptic identity?
He talks about living in the now, emphasizes the sense of urgency and hope that comes with believing in Christ's imminent return.
So it's not about like holding up in a bunker and waiting for the world to end. It's about living each day with purpose and intentionality, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't know when that return will happen.
Exactly. He quotes 2 Corinthians 6:2, "I tell you, now is the time of God's favor, now is the day of salvation." He sees this awareness of the coming end as a motivator to make the most of the present moment. It's about seizing every opportunity to live out our faith and make a difference in the world.
I love that. It flips the whole end of the world narrative on its head. It's not about fear, but about embracing the opportunity we have right now. What's the next piece of the puzzle? What's centration number 3?
God's transcendence. Geronich reminds us that we can't put God in a box or try to control him. We have to be open to the mystery and wonder of who God is.
He quotes Isaiah 55:8 on this one, right? "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." It's a reminder that God is always bigger, more mysterious than we can even comprehend.
Absolutely. He argues that living in response to the coming God means letting go of our idols, our attempts to manipulate or define God according to our own limited understanding. It's about surrender, being open to the unexpected ways God might work in our lives.
That's a humbling thought. Okay, what's the fourth centration?
The cruciform life. Geronich insists that authentic apocalyptic identity is rooted in the cross of Christ. It's about more than just believing in the crucifixion. It's about making it central to how we live our lives.
He's channeling Paul here, who said, "For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." 1 Corinthians 2:2. It's about letting the cross shape our values, priorities, our relationships.
Right. Geronich points to 2 key aspects of the cruciform life: kenosis, or self-emptying, and solidarity with those who are suffering. It's a call to radical selflessness, putting the needs of others before our own. It's about following Christ's example of humility and sacrifice.
That sounds a lot like the ministry of reconciliation that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 5:1. It's about bridging divides, healing wounds, and embodying God's love in a broken world. What's the 5th centration? What else does Geronich highlight?
This one is powerful: counter-memory. Geronich argues that an authentic apocalyptic perspective requires us to remember and acknowledge the silenced voices of history. Those who have been marginalized, oppressed, or forgotten.
He connects this to Revelation 6:10, where the martyrs under the altar cry out, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" It's a reminder that God sees the suffering of the innocent and that he will ultimately bring justice.
Exactly. Geronich is calling for a kind of counter-narrative, one that challenges the dominant narratives that often justify violence, oppression, and inequality. He argues that true apocalyptic hope is inseparable from a commitment to justice and solidarity with the suffering.
So it's not just about looking forward to a future utopia. It's about actively working to make that utopia a reality here and now by fighting for justice, giving voice to those who've been silenced. Wow, this is heavy stuff. Okay, I'm ready for centration number 6. What is it?
Tragic consciousness. This one might be a bit more challenging to grasp. He's wrestling with the age-old question of how a good and loving God can allow suffering to exist.
It's a question that has haunted humanity for centuries. He quotes Romans 8:22 here. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. It's acknowledging the brokenness of the world, the pain and suffering that seem so at odds with the idea of a loving God.
Right. Juronichich argues that we can't simply ignore or dismiss the reality of suffering. He even uses the phrase, the weakness of God, which he borrows from Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
The weakness of God. That's a bold statement. Is he suggesting that God is actually powerless in the face of suffering?
Not quite. He's pointing to the mystery of God's self-limitation. He's acknowledging that God, in his love for humanity, has given us free will, and that this freedom, tragically, often leads to suffering. It's about recognizing the tension between God's sovereignty and human freedom, and wrestling with those difficult questions that arise from that tension.
So it's about holding that tension,
Yeah.
right? Recognizing that sometimes bad things happen, even when God desires otherwise. It's a more nuanced view of God's role in the world. Okay, what's the next centration?
Peacemaking. Dronachich connects this back to the teachings of Jesus, specifically the Beatitudes. It's about being a force for peace in a world that's so often defined by conflict.
He quotes Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. It's about actively working for peace in all areas of life, not just the absence of war. It's about promoting understanding, reconciliation, and justice in our families, our communities, our world.
Exactly. And he draws this connection between this peacemaking ethic and the Adventist pioneers who were pacifists and refused to participate in war. It's about embodying the peace of Christ in a world that's, often torn apart by violence and division.
Okay, what's the 8th centration? What else does Dronachich emphasize?
Critical consciousness. This one is all about questioning assumptions, challenging the status quo, and recognizing how power structures can lead to injustice and oppression. It's about not just accepting things as they are, but about asking hard questions and seeking truth.
He quotes Galatians 4:3 here. When we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. It's about recognizing that the world's systems and values are often at odds with God's kingdom, and we have to be discerning and willing to challenge those systems.
He's encouraging a kind of prophetic discernment, a willingness to ask tough questions about how things work and why. He's suggesting that authentic, apocalyptic living requires a healthy skepticism of those in power and a commitment to speaking truth to power, even when it's uncomfortable.
So it's about being aware of the subtle ways we can be influenced by the world's ideologies and values, and having the courage to challenge those ideologies when they conflict with the gospel. Okay, we're down to the last 2 centrations. What's number 9?
Exilic consciousness. Gerontich describes this as a sense of being like a cosmopolitan exile in a world that's opposed to God's kingdom. It's about recognizing that our ultimate allegiance is to God, not to any earthly nation or tribe.
He draws on 1 Peter 1:1-2, which addresses those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. It's about recognizing that as Christians, we're ultimately citizens of heaven, not of any earthly nation or tribe.
Right. He argues that this exilic consciousness should lead us to resist any kind of tribalism or nationalism that puts our allegiance to any earthly power above our allegiance to God. It's about maintaining a critical distance from the values and priorities of the world, even while seeking its good.
So it's about living with a sense of detachment from the world's values and systems, but still engaging with the world compassionately and seeking its good. It's a delicate balance. Okay, bring us home. What's the 10th and final centration?
Kingdom consciousness. Juronichich argues that even though we live as exiles in a fallen world, we should still be actively looking for signs of God's kingdom breaking through. It's about recognizing those glimpses of hope and beauty that point us towards that future reality of God's reign.
He quotes Jeremiah 29:7 here, which encourages God's people, even in exile, to seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. It's about seeing and supporting the good wherever we find it, even in unexpected places.
Exactly. He's suggesting that this kingdom consciousness should lead us to celebrate beauty, truth, and goodness wherever we encounter them, recognizing that God is at work even in a world that's often resistant to his presence. It's about being agents of hope and healing, bringing light into the darkness.
Yeah, okay, that was a whirlwind tour of 10 profound centrations. How do they all fit together? What's the overall message Gerontic is trying to convey through these ideas?
I think he's arguing that authentic Adventist apocalyptic identity is not about withdrawing from the world or becoming fixated on end time scenarios. It's about living a life that's radically centered on Christ, a life that's characterized by love, justice, hope, and a deep awareness of God's presence in the world, even amidst suffering and brokenness. It's about letting our belief in Christ's return shape every aspect of our lives, our relationships, our work, our consumption habits, our political engagement, everything.
So it's about embodying the values of God's kingdom here and now, even as we long for its full realization in the future. It's about living out the gospel in a tangible, practical way, making a difference in the world around us. But he doesn't just leave it at that, does he? He brings in another voice towards the end of the chapter, right?
You're right. He concludes by quoting Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who talks about Christ as the mediator, the one through whom we experience everything. It's about filtering our entire lives through the lens of our relationship with Christ.
Bonhoeffer says, Christ is in the middle. He has deprived those whom he has called of every immediate connection to those given realities. He wants to be the medium. Everything should happen only through him, because the whole world was created by him and for him. John 1.3, 1 Corinthians 8.6, Hebrew 1.2. He is the sole mediator in the world. Since Christ, there has been no more unmediated relationship for the human person, neither to God nor to the world. Christ intends to be the mediator. That's a powerful statement. What does that even mean in practical terms?
It's a reminder that our relationship with Christ should permeate every aspect of our lives, not just our religious activities or beliefs. It's about seeing the world through the lens of Christ, letting his love and grace shape how we interact with others, how we approach our work, how we view culture, everything.
It's about letting Christ be the center, the filter through which we experience and engage with the world around us.
Yeah.
That's a pretty radical concept.
It is, and it's a challenge to live up to, but I think that's what Gerontic is getting at. He's calling for a radical reorientation of our hearts and minds, a transformation that starts from the inside out and ripples outward, impacting everything we do and everything we are.
This has been an incredibly rich and challenging conversation. I feel like I need some time to process all of this. But before we wrap up, expert speaker, what's one thought you'd like to leave our listener with today? Something they can ponder as they go about their week.
That's a good question. After diving deep into Geronic's work, I keep coming back to this idea that apocalyptic living isn't about escaping the world or hiding in a bunker. It's about engaging with the world in a way that brings transformation and hope.
So it's not about checking out, but about leaning in, even when things feel chaotic, uncertain.
Exactly. It's about letting our belief in Christ's return fuel our passion to make a difference here and now. Living with this, incredible sense of urgency, knowing that Christ is coming soon, but also recognizing that we have a responsibility to be his hands and feet in the world right now.
That's a powerful challenge. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture.
It is. And, Geronicus seems to be saying that our faith should permeate everything we do. It's not just about how we spend our Sundays. It's about how we treat our families, how we interact with our colleagues, how we spend our money, how we vote, every single choice we make.
It's about aligning our orienting beliefs with the reality of Christ's lordship.
Right.
And then letting those beliefs flow outward, shaping every aspect of our existential situation.
Absolutely. It's not a one-time decision. It's a daily commitment, a continual striving to become more like Christ, embodying his love and grace in a world that so desperately needs it.
I love that. It's a reminder that apocalyptic living isn't about fear or judgment. It's about hope and transformation. It's about becoming the people God created us to be, living lives that reflect the beauty and goodness of his kingdom, even amidst the, messiness of our everyday lives.
And you know what? That's something we can all strive for, no matter where we are on our spiritual journeys. It's not about perfection, but about progress. Taking those small steps day by day to align our lives with God's will and let his love shine through us.
Well, listeners, we've certainly unpacked a lot today. We've explored the challenges and contradictions of living out our faith in a complex world. We've wrestled with those difficult questions, considered new perspectives, and hopefully this deep dive has sparked some reflection, maybe even some healthy introspection.
It's been quite a journey.
As you go about your week, we encourage you to ponder this question. What does it mean for you to live an authentically apocalyptic life? A life that's fully surrendered to Christ and committed to making his kingdom a reality here and now.
Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.